Well, that was great, Kieran. Thank you very much. You're becoming quite the expert now at the whole video thing, I think. So has anybody got any burning questions about making their compost or what to put in their compost? I might start the ball rolling with a question I got from earlier on today. Can you add eggshells to your compost, Kieran?
You can at the later stages, but they're very gritty, and you know, when you're going to be using the compost, you don't want them sharp edge shells in. I would save my eggshells and use them to deter the slugs from around the garden. But you know, when your compost is well established, you can break them up and put them into it. It's not going to do any harm. It's just that the early stages, that they can be very sharp and gritty. But yeah, we use them, but I'd avoid them myself. I try not to put them in.
Okay. I can remember somebody once told me that you could compost anything that was once living. You know, so if, you know, cotton or wool or wood or, you know, meaning paper and stuff, which is kind of a nice enough rule to follow, I think. As well, we've got a question here from Evie, who wants to know, is seaweed considered green or brown?
Yeah, I would class that as green, but yeah, again, really chop it up, because it takes a long while to break it down. You know, you want to get that broken down as soon as you can. You know, put it into a bucket and get some garden shears and, you know, really chop it up nice and fine. But yeah, seaweed's fine.
Okay. Could I just ask too, Kieran, if you were putting seaweed in your compost or even as a mulch onto raised beds or something, would you hose the salt off it first, or would you not bother?
No, always clean it first. Yeah.
Okay, so just give it a hose, or a bucket or something like that. Okay, Monica has got a question. Can you use chicken manure?
Yeah, of course. I've just lost the screen, sorry. Yeah, you can use chicken manure. Again, you'd class that as your green, but what was it say? That would then be a very high nitrogen, so you'd have to put a lot of paper or leaves in on top of that just to reduce the smell, really. But yeah, work away with chicken manure.
Surely, but that probably leads really nicely on to our next question from Victoria, who wants to know, can you use shavings in that were used in a chicken coop?
Yeah, so the only thing with sawdust is I would try and make sure that it's from wood that's not been treated, you know, because you don't want any pesticides in there. But yeah, I mean, the shavings would go in there. Class that as your brown material.
Yeah, surely that would make a good mixture too, wouldn't it? So Rory has got a question as well to say, so is it not essential to turn the compost? He says, I have a good pile of matter within pallets, but would have difficulty turning the matter at the bottom.
It's a good idea to do it once a month, because it adds oxygen into your compost. If you find that your compost is too dry or compact, it will start to smell and you might get a mold in there. But you know, just turning it helps to reduce that. If your compost does get too dry, it can encourage ants to make nests in there. So if you're not turning it and it's too dry, just add some water, but you don't want it to get all compact. You want some oxygen in there to help it break down. You want to help them microorganisms as much as you can, and the worms. And you'll find that if it's too dry and too compact, there's no air in there, it slows them down and they stop reproducing and stop working, really. So it's a good idea to turn it regularly.
Sure. Okay. We have question now questions are coming in, which is brilliant, from Nicola, who asks, can you talk a bit about cow manure? How long should you leave it before you use it?
Yeah, the thing with cow manure is it can take some of the nitrogen out of your compost to break itself down before it adds to it. I would still use it as such, but I would just put a few layers on, try not to put too much in at once. But you can use it. It's still it's still going to work. Probably give it a couple of months to dry out, really, if you can. Maybe have a separate compost for your cow manure, like I do with the leaves. I have a separate one for the leaves because I know if I add one bucket full of greens, I've got to add 2 buckets of leaves. So maybe you could do that. Have one for your cow manure, and then add that, and then add your brown, so your carbon into it on top of that.
Sure. Okay. Funny, I was going to suggest that myself. If you got a load of cow manure, and it didn't appear to be that well rotted down, for a few years or so, you could just leave it in a corner and let nature take its course, couldn't you, for a wee while?
Yeah, maybe cover it over though, because it does attract a lot of weed seeds, and
Sure. Yeah.
there's probably some in there with it.
Okay. Monica would like to know, can you use ashes from turf or wood fires?
Wood fires you can use, yes, but I wouldn't use ashes from a coal fire, but wood fires you can do, yeah.
Yeah.
And turf would be okay.
On turf would be okay, yeah. So no coal.
No, I would avoid using coal if I could, yeah.
Yeah, but also the ashes from a wood fire would provide potash, wouldn't it? Which is really good for kind of around your fruit trees, or for flooring and
Yeah,
stuff.
and I have been told that also deters slugs, but I'm yet to see it. I haven't tried it yet myself.
Yes. Okay, we have another one here from Nicola. Have you ever come across any community composting schemes?
The local authority, a lot of them would do it. They would take your green kitchen waste and do it. I've not come across any other ones than that, but when I lived over in England, there was a place where you could take your kitchen waste and they would give you compost in return, which was a great idea. But like I say, local authorities, I know Derry City Council, they do it.
Sure. Okay. I think too, if a lot of community gardens and allotment sites would have compost areas within the site. Would you find that, Kieran?
Well, I haven't really seen any over here. I know they do over in England, but they would be guarded. It's a valuable product, and whoever had their own compost, they wanted to keep it themselves. So
everybody be fighting over it, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Black gold, it's called.
Black gold, that's exactly what it is called. So Aileen has a question, which a couple of questions actually. First one is, I have a compost pit and light gets into it, so weeds grow on my compost. Should I use cardboard to block all the light?
You could use cardboard, or an old carpet is good as well. You find that the cardboard will break down, especially when it gets wet. But an old carpet or Hessian sacking, if you can get that, whatever you can reuse would be what I'd recommend.
Surely. I think Aileen also would like to know that that she says she realizes that twigs and sticks take longer to break down, but are they beneficial to the compost, and is it worthwhile to compost them?
Yeah, break everything down. Like I say, get a bucket and use your garden shears and chop them all up. I wouldn't tend to put the big twigs in. There's a whole different, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's I've lost it at the moment, composting, where you can use twigs and branches and stuff at the bottom and then put some soil on the top, but that does take ages to break down. That's a whole different kind of composting, really. I'm predominantly looking at what we call hot composting, where it'd be your small twigs. So if you was raking the leaves up in your garden and you get a few little twigs in there, you know, just put them in as well.
I think it's quite nice too that, you know, a few twigs and sticks that, as you say, aren't too big, lets in a bit of air as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, important too. Let me see. Rory has another question. He's asking, can you continue to add decomposed grass cut during the year to your compost during the winter?
Yes, yep, that's green. As long as you, like I was saying earlier, you see, your green waste is your nitrogen. So if you find it, you're putting a lot of grass cuttings in and you're smelling it a lot because they do get quite ripe, just add some shredded paper or some leaves, you know, just to break it down and just to add that carbon, really. But yeah, feel free to use grass cuttings.
And
it's free.
I think that's a good thing too, because if you know, if you have a lot of grass cuttings, which you know we would have with a big lawn, it's good not to try and use it all at once in the compost. Otherwise, you're adding a whole load of nitrogen at once. So, you know, to keep it to the side and then just add it as you have more browns is probably a very good idea as well. Aileen again is asking about horse manure. Is horse manure any good for veg growing?
Yeah, like I say, it's just the same as the cow manure. The only manure I wouldn't use, it would be dog and cat, you know, because they'll have eaten meat and you don't really want any meat or dairy products in there. But cow and horses manure, that would be fine, as long as you keep the great ratio going.
Absolutely. And Amanda is asking, could you use lino as a covering instead of carpet?
Well, the lino's just going to keep the wet off altogether. You do want some moisture in there, but I mean, if lino's all that you've got, that's fine. But you really want to let some of the water in, but not too much. That's the only reason I could use the carpet. But the carpet also keeps the heat in, whereas the lino wouldn't keep as much as the heat in. You could put some holes in the lino, and that I'm sorry, I've just lost my screen again. That would help, you know, if you did put some air holes in the top.
Sure. Okay. Another one from Monica to say that her compost has a lot of worms, and she says, I know this is okay, but if there are too many, is that good or bad?
No, that's good, because they're doing what they should be doing. They're working it for you. Just use it to your advantage and add more organic matter to it.
Yeah, there's no such thing as too many worms, really. Sure, there aren't, Kieran, whether that's in your compost or in your soil or whatever. I have another question here. Would you add cooked food, Kieran?
Not if I could help it. I really wouldn't use cooked food. I mean, I've heard of people putting old porridge in there, but it tends to attract vermin as well as anything else, you see.
Yeah, certainly. And that, I mean, we have compost bays here, and we wouldn't be as diligent as you and turn it every month. In fact, we'd kind of just keep piling ours on for about a year, and then we'd turn it once, you know, and then leave it again. But I think the turning thing also disturbs any of our furry friends that might be setting up a home in there. But actually, cooked food and of course you'd never ever put meat in there either. Sure, you wouldn't. No. But let me see. Next question. Why is it good to leave the bottom of a compost bin open?
it lets the worms to go up.
Mhm.
You know, if the compost is on the floor, you'll see on that second video there that I did, I had it covered up there, but that was just purely because I only had a small amount of compost to do. So I just wanted to get a good layer on there. Then I would remove that sheet and let it all go down onto the floor so that the worms can do their work, and then all the other microorganisms as well that work in there. You know, other insects will go in and they do their work as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yes. Let's see, and let's the wildlife in, or the good stuff. Rory has another wee question there, Kieran, to say, how long should composting take, and how do you know when it is done, and is it best to use it in the springtime?
Sorry, could you say that again?
How long should composting take, and how do you know when it's done?
It all depends on what you're using. You know, like I said, that using grass cuttings and leaves and your kitchen waste, it could take 9 months, it could take 12 months. It all depends on what you're actually using. But if you keep turning it regularly, that does speed it up. You can buy things to speed it up, but I don't bother with them. You don't really need them. 12 months will probably take a good, you know, you start getting some decent compost. And the way people have described it to me is as like, if it looks like a chocolate cake, you know, if you rub it together and it's like a chocolate cake, and you can just squeeze it and you get a couple of droplets of water from it, then you know you've got good compost.
Well, that brings me neatly on to one other question, was how should your compost smell?
You shouldn't really get, you know, if you've got the balance right, the 2-to-1 ratio, you shouldn't really be getting much smell from it. If you are, like I was saying, put some straw or some shredded paper or more leaves on, some more carbon, and that should reduce the smell, really.
Sure, it should just really smell like the earth, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Really? Kieran. Rory's other question was here, is it best to use the compost in the spring?
Well, use it whenever it's ready. It's ideal for putting a spring mulch around your plants to give them that food, and it also suppresses the weeds. So that would be why I tend to use it in the spring. But I would still keep composting, you know.
Sure, Kieran. And you could also, I suppose, if you had areas that didn't have plants in them at the minute, and you had your own compost, you could use that as a wee mulch over the winter time as well.
Yeah. Especially with your autumn leaves now that's dropping, you know, they keep the moisture in, and they keep the weeds at bay, and then, like you say, you can just dig it on in come the spring.
Fantastic, brilliant. Monica has another question to say, how far off the ground for the base? An inch or two? Question mark.
Well, like I was just saying, I technically would put it straight onto the ground so that the worms have got room to come up, and you've got drainage there as well. The only reason I had that one off the ground there was because it had the wooden on the pallets, and then eventually I would just knock them off and put them on the ground. But you do get some airflow through there. If you're finding that your compost isn't working with it on the floor, do raise it up a little so that you do get some oxygen coming through the bottom.
Okay.
But normally I would just have it onto the ground.
Yeah, me too, because it's amazing, I think, too, how worms just appear, don't they?
Yeah.
Absolutely worms. So even if you have it on like concrete or something, the worms do come. It just always amazes me. Amanda would like to know, how many bins or units would you recommend to get a good yearly supply?
I couldn't tell you offhand how many it would be. It's just something that I do. We just stack it up because we want it from the middle to heat out, but I couldn't tell you how many it would take, honestly.
Sure. I think, Kieran, too, if sometimes people say to have 2 or 3 bays. Obviously, it depends on how much matter you have, but you can start one, fill one, and turn it, and then let it sit and start another one.
Yeah.
Beside it, and then turn the first one. So if you had enough stuff, 2 or 3 would be probably a good enough thing to do, but not everybody has that amount of space or that amount of material as well. Another question is what would you add to your compost heap if it was too dry?
Well, just test it every now and again. Do you know, when you're turning it, you'll notice if it's too dry. If it's too dry, just get a watering can and just sprinkle some water on it. But you don't want too much, but then again, you don't want too little.
Sure. And then similarly, if it's too dry or too wet, you'd want to add cardboard and straw and leaves and stuff to dry it out. I have another question here, Kieran. If you obviously this time of year the leaves are starting to come off the trees, so there's lots and lots of leaves around. So separate to your compost, obviously you can add some of those into your compost as well, but you can make what's known as leaf mold.
Yeah.
Just by gathering up all of the leaves that you come across and leaving them somewhere covered for probably a year at least.
Yeah, 12 months. I'm using leaf mold that I got from last autumn now, mulching the beds with it and adding it to the compost heap. It's a great free resource, all these leaves. That's why I said on the video, go out with a carrier bag or something and bring a few home on your walk.
I know, certainly. And it's a great thing for improving your soil, particularly if it's really heavy, or clay soil. And there's probably not as many nutrients in leaf mold as there would be in a compost mixture. But it's very good for structure, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and like you say, it breaks down the clay soil, and if you've got something that's too sandy, add it to that as well, and it'll do exactly that. It'll add something to it.
Sure.
Keep the moisture in there, whereas the sand would just let the moisture run away.
Okay, brilliant. Let me see what. Yes, common question. What about adding weed seeds and roots of weeds and stuff? How do you deal with them?
I try to avoid any weeds to go in there, because if you had a big compost heap, that would generate enough heat to get rid of the weed seeds. But in your small garden one, you tend to not get the temperature that you needed to break them down or to kill the weed seeds. So I always try and avoid any weed seeds whatsoever. If I'm going to cut some weeds up to put in there, I try and make sure there's no roots on them or seed heads on them, really.
Sure. Okay. And then I remember somebody saying one time that if you'd roots like of dandelions or docks, the way you get really long tap roots, that you could soak them in water till they become sort of mush, and then add them into your compost as well. But yeah, there's no point in perpetuating a weed problem. Sure, there's not through your compost as well. Another question: have you ever tried the Tumbler compost bins? The ones you see advertised where you put in a mixture of stuff.
Yeah, and you just rotate it every now and again. I've never used one. I have seen them, but I'm just old school, where I just throw it onto the pile and then just turn it. I mean, they're ideal if you've only got a small little garden or something, and you want to throw your waste in there and just turn it every now and again. They still make the compost, but I'm just not enough for what I'd want, if I'm honest.
Sure. I think too that doing it that way, that means you don't really get the worms, you know, and worm activity and worm cast through your compost are something that makes it incredibly nutritious as well for your garden. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody's gone quiet now, even though, well, there was a whole flurry of questions there. Has anybody got anything else that they're down to know about compost or leaf mold? Or I suppose another question about coming back to the manure thing, Kieran. There is this thing where, you know, if livestock have been grazing on fields that are spread a lot for weeds, for broadleaf weeds, and then, you know, and that comes through in the silage, for instance, that can pass through an animal, can't it? You know, you hear, and even though the compost is maybe, or the manure is rotted down for a couple of years, there still sometimes can be a residue.
Yeah, I was it was just a few weeks ago I was offered some grass cuttings from the bowling green, but I had to turn it down, and it was because I couldn't be sure that there was no weed killer or pesticide. You know, they don't like worms on bowling greens, so they spray that for to kill the worms. And you know, you're just going to be adding that chemical to your compost, whereas I like to keep the compost chemical free. You know, they put fertilizer on the bowling greens, so just the same as, you know, if somebody had fed the grass that the cows had been eating with some kind of growth retardant or whatever, we don't want to be adding that to our compost, really. No.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, more questions coming in, Kieran, for to like the Oracle and compost here. Amanda would like to know, what about conkers and their shells? Can they be used, and are they green or brown?
Well, they're living, so I would class them as green, but again, you don't want a conker tree because they will grow. You'll have a horse chestnut growing out of your compost if you're not careful. I did know a guy that used to grow his marrows in his horse manure, and having put in a conker in would be exactly the same. You would get a horse chestnut tree growing through your compost heap if you're not careful. I don't think we get the heat generated enough in a small compost heap to stop the seeds from germinating, really. So I wouldn't put conker seeds in.
Sure.
You could smash them all up, I suppose, and they'd still make a nice organic
yeah
from it.
Yeah, give them a good old bash.
Smash them all up. Yeah.
Smash them all up. Rory is asking, when the compost is ready, do you then pot directly just using the compost, or do you mix that with topsoil?
It depends what I'm using it for. If I was going to just use it as a mulch to feed the plants, I would just put it directly. If I was going to use it for composting for seedlings, I would just riddle it, you know, get some of them twigs and stuff out of it, and then I could mix that with a bit of topsoil if I wanted to, just to use it for seedlings. It all depends what you want to use it for, really.
Surely. So for seedlings and stuff, you don't need it to be that rich, really. So, you know, you can you could add a bit of topsoil there, or if you're potting something on, you could just use it in its pure form, probably. Okay, Aileen again is asking, could you explain again how to make leaf mold? Should I keep my attempts separate from the main compost?
Yeah, well, like Julie was saying earlier, that if you have a separate bay to put your leaves in, because what the leaves is doing is that's adding carbon to your compost. So you want to add as much, well, you want to add twice as much carbon as you do your green waste. So it's handy to just keep it separately and then put your nitrogen in, and then add the leaves. Otherwise you're going to have too much carbon and not enough nitrogen. You're looking for the correct balance, you see. So that's why I would keep it separate, even if you just kept them in big old coal sacks or something like that until you were ready to use them. Or you could build another bay and keep them in there like I have done.
Sure. Actually, Kieran, sometimes, you know, people advocate putting them in, you know, if you have old plastic compost bags or something, you can fill those, stuff them full of leaves, and then use your garden fork to put a few holes in the bag, you know, tie the bag up and then just leave it somewhere to, you know, to rot down really slowly as well. So I suppose that's worth thinking about too. Evie is asking, when would you use leaf mold as opposed to compost?
Well, if I didn't have any compost, but it's not got that food, you know, it's not got the rich nutrients and as much as compost has. But you know, I would use leaves. You still use them as a mulch. You know, they will eventually rot down and give some food to the plant, but they will keep the weeds at bay and keep the moisture in the ground. So, you know, you can use them as a mulch.
Sure. I think too, Kieran, I always see Monty Don, you know, he makes his own seed sowing compost and everything. And he seems to use a mixture of compost and leaf mold for that kind of mixture, and then, you know, sieves out the lumps and things. So but yeah, it's a very valuable resource. Again, it's just probably not as nutrient rich as your compost. Any other questions? That's been brilliant tonight. Now that's 21 questions. In fact, that's more than 21 questions because I had some written down, Kieran. So well done, you.
Yeah.
You'd answered. I think that's actually about 27 questions.
Oh, I may have answered 18 of them and you answered the rest, so I'm not taking all that credit.
I don't know. But
it was the same ratio that we use for the composting, 2 to 1.
Yeah. Thank you. And Aileen saying thank you. I found this really useful. Actually, I had on the invitation for this, Kieran, I don't know if you saw it, I put out a quote from Bette Midler, you know, the singer and the actress.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know, but
I do, yeah.
But so she is a massive environmentalist and a big fan of composting, and one of her famous quotes is, you know, that she didn't really understand life or the universe or that there was a God until she started making compost, and then everything became really clear to her. So I think that's a wee bit over the top, but it kind of illustrates the satisfaction you get from making something so useful out of waste product, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, like we keep saying, it's a valuable product, and it's for free. You know, you don't get much for free in this world.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, obviously we've all got sort of green bins and food bins and stuff now that, you know, the councils would pick up, or I think most councils do. And I always assumed that most of that went for composting, but a lot of it goes for biodigestion as well, doesn't it? For you know, to produce energy and stuff. So, you know, even more reason to, if you can, make a wee bit of your own compost, because at least you're knowing exactly what's going into it.
Another reason is they say that, I think it was I'm quoting Derry City Council, but a third of, you know, if you're composting yourself, you're reducing a third of the waste that goes into a landfill site each year. So you're doing that as well. You know, you're saving the earth to some degree, because what you're composting isn't going into a landfill site, and that's what we're all trying to avoid, really.
Absolutely. That's, you know, it's more environmentally friendly too. Rory he's asked a question about free liquid nettle fertilizer. So again, another brilliant and very useful thing to have. So I know we did cover this probably in one of the last ones, but if you want to just tell the guys again how you would do that with your nettles, Kieran.
Yeah, I say again, get a bucket, chop them up, use your shears if need be. Put your nettles into the a bucket, fill the whole bucket with your nettles, and then add some water. Keep it for say about 3 weeks away from the house because it does smell to high heaven, and then you've got a great organic soup, is what I would call it. Some people call it nettle tea or soup, but if you add 1 part of your brown gunge that you get in there to 10 parts of water into your watering can, and you've got an organic feed that will feed everything in your garden. We use it for all the tomatoes. I thought we was getting blight on the potatoes this year, and I did once a week. I fed them with my nettle soup. Like I say, 1 part nettle soup to 10 parts water, and it just disappeared. So I don't think it was blight. It was just that they wanted feeding. So we had a great crop of potatoes then, and I'll say the tomatoes out of this world, and it was all nettle and comfrey that we used. We didn't buy any in whatsoever.
That's brilliant. That's so, yeah, so satisfying, as you say, and the fact that you can see the results in front of your eyes is so it's really satisfying too, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, the leaves were all going yellow on the potatoes. We started every Friday. We made a point of doing it every Friday, and they just picked up, and we had great potatoes. So I recommend it.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Kieran. There's one thing I wanted to say to the guys who are on there this evening. I've had a couple of emails just about, you know, apple trees and stuff not looking their best, but you know, it's 100% normal for apple trees to lose all their leaves now. That's what they do in the winter time. So, and they will go a bit yellow and look a bit bedraggled kind of before that, but don't worry, because come springtime you'll get the blossom and you'll get fresh leaves, and it'll all sprout back to life again. So if your apple tree's looking like that, don't worry, that's quite natural for this time of year, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we've no more questions, and I want to thank Kieran very much indeed. Again, that was really helpful and useful. And thank you to all you Food for Thought guys who logged on again this evening. And we'll see you next week, hopefully. So enjoy your evening, and thanks a million.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.